Every single time, for 3 straight years, he brought 2 chairs, and nobody could figure out why. They called him strange, they called it disruptive, but he never once stopped bringing that chair. So tell me, what really happened that day?
It's not what you think.
So she finally asked him the question everyone was afraid to ask, and what he said left her speechless. Then his daughter stood up in front of the entire school and said the words that changed everything. What she pinned to that empty chair brought an entire school to tears, and it will break your heart too.
If you have ever sat in a folding chair at a school event and felt the empty seat beside you weigh more than the one you were sitting in, you already understand Daniel Cole. Before this story ends, you will understand why he never let anyone take that seat, and why, on the last day of the school year, a room full of strangers stood up and cried. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe now, because what happens next will stay with you long after the video ends. Every year, at every single event at Maple Grove Elementary, Daniel Cole did the same strange, quiet thing. He arrived early. He found 2 chairs, not one, and he set the second chair beside his own, empty, with a folded light blue cardigan draped neatly over the back of it, as if someone were about to walk in and sit down. Nobody sat down. Nobody ever did. But Daniel always left the seat. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered from years of construction work, with short, dark brown hair that he cut himself in the bathroom mirror because barbershop time was time, away from his daughter. His hazel eyes carried the particular tiredness of a man who worked 10-hour days and then came home to braid hair, check homework, and burn slightly less spaghetti than the night before. He wore the same navy flannel to almost every event, sleeves rolled to the forearm, because it was the shirt, Sarah used to say, made him look like he had his life together, even on days he didn't. Lily Cole was 8 years old. With wild auburn curls her father never quite mastered into a straight braid, a spray of freckles across her nose, and a gap-toothed smile that appeared exactly the way her mother's used to, the kind that started slow and then took over her whole face. Lily was in the 3rd grade at Maple Grove, and she was, by every teacher's account, one of the brightest and gentlest kids in her class. She was also the only child at that school who had learned, at 5 years old, what it meant to say goodbye to a mother in a hospital room instead of at a bus stop. Daniel and Sarah had met the way ordinary love stories often begin, without any hint of the tragedy waiting years down the road, at a mutual friend's barbecue, arguing cheerfully over whether pineapple belonged on a burger. Sarah had worked as a 2nd-grade teacher 2 towns over, the kind of teacher kids remembered for the rest of their lives. And Daniel had spent the better part of that first summer showing up to pick her up from work early, just so he could carry her tote bag full of ungraded spelling tests to the car. They married 18 months later in her parents' backyard. Under a string of lights, Daniel had spent 3 exhausting weekends hanging himself, insisting no professional could do it right. Lily arrived 2 years after that, and for a while, their life together had been almost embarrassingly ordinary in the best possible way. Sack lunches, Sunday pancakes, the small, unglamorous rituals of a young family that neither of them ever imagined would end early. Sarah Cole had died 3 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed too late, gone in 11 months. She had been 32. She had been, by everyone who knew her, the kind of person a room got brighter around. She had also been, before anything else, Lily's mother, the one who promised, in the last clear-headed week she had, that she would never miss anything. Not a single school play, not a single spelling bee, not one single ordinary Tuesday pickup line. She made Daniel promise something too, though he never told anyone what it was. Not the other parents, not his own mother, not even, for a long time, Lily herself. He remembered the exact hospital room, the exact color of the late afternoon light through the blinds, the exact way Sarah's voice had gone thin, but somehow still steady when she made him swear it. She had been too weak that week to sit up on her own, and Lily had been staying with Daniel's Mother, so she wouldn't have to see her mother, that fragile, that far gone. Sarah had held his hand with what strength she had left, and made him lean close, as though the promise itself needed privacy. "I don't care how you do it," she had whispered. "Balloons, an empty chair, a picture in your wallet. I don't care. I just need her to know I was trying to be there, every single time. Promise me, she never has to wonder if I would have come." He had promised through tears he hadn't let her see fall, not wanting her last clear memory of him to be grief instead of certainty. 3 weeks later she was gone, and Daniel spent the following month in a fog so thick he barely remembered driving Lily to her first day of kindergarten. It was only when the school sent home a flyer for back-to-school night that the promise came, rushing back to him, sudden and urgent, and he found himself standing in his garage that evening, staring at 2 folding chairs, trying to figure out how a man was supposed to keep a promise to someone who was no longer there to release him from it. He kept that promise the only way he knew how. He brought a second chair. He brought the cardigan, the same soft blue one Sarah had worn on the last good day they had. Together, sitting on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the dusk, and he sat beside an empty seat at every open house, every holiday concert, every awards assembly, as if his wife were simply running a few minutes late, the way she so often used to be. The first time he did it, at Lily's kindergarten graduation, nobody noticed much. Grief was still fresh enough in the community that people assumed it was simply a man missing his wife, the way any of them might have done. There were sympathetic nods. A few parents brought casseroles that week, the way small towns do. But grief has a strange relationship with time in other people's eyes. After the first year, the nods turned into glances. After the second year, the glances turned into whispers. By the time Lily reached 3rd grade, the whispers had become something closer to a running commentary that Daniel pretended not to hear, and Lily, old enough now to understand tone, even when she didn't understand every word, could no longer avoid. "He still brings the chair," she overheard one mother say to another at the fall festival, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "It's been 3 years. Don't you think that's a little much? I heard he won't even let anyone else sit in it," the other mother replied. "My Tyler tried to grab it once for the puppet show, and the dad about had a heart attack." Lily had stood there, holding a paper plate of cider donuts, feeling her face go hot in a way that had nothing to do with the October sun. She didn't say anything. She never did. But that night, in the car on the way home, she finally asked the question she'd been swallowing for 2 years. "Dad, why do we always bring the chair?" Daniel had gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, the way he did whenever a question got too close to the center of him. "It's for Mom," he said, "so she doesn't miss anything." "But she's not really there," Lily said, quiet, careful, the way children are when they're testing whether an idea will break something. "Everyone says so." "She's there in the way that matters," Daniel answered. "I promised her, Lily. I promised her she'd never miss one single thing in your life. Not one, no matter what. This is how I keep that promise. I don't expect everyone to understand it. I just need you to." Lily hadn't said anything else that night, but she also hadn't asked him to stop bringing the chair. Not then, not for a long time after. The trouble was that 8-year-olds live inside the opinions of other 8-year-olds, and other 8-year-olds live inside the opinions of their parents. By November, a boy named Marcus had started calling Lily empty chair girl on the playground, not out of real cruelty, just the thoughtless mimicry kids do when they've heard adults say something enough times. It stuck anyway. It always does. Lily came home one Tuesday with red-rimmed eyes, and wouldn't say why until Daniel sat on the edge of her bed and waited, the way he'd learned to wait, patient as stone, until she was ready. "They make fun of the chair," she finally said into her pillow. "They make fun of me." Daniel felt something crack quietly in his chest, the particular pain of watching your own coping mechanism become your child's burden. He didn't know, in that moment, whether the right thing to do was to hold firm to the promise, or to let it go for her sake. He only knew that he didn't sleep much that night. turning the same two impossible choices over and over in the dark. The low point came at the science fair in late October, an event Daniel had been dreading all month, because Lily's project, a small volcano she and Daniel had built together over 3 weekends, complete with a hand-painted sign that read, "For Mom, who loved chemistry class," meant more to her than any grade could measure. He set up the 2 chairs at the end of the judging aisle as usual, cardigan draped over the second one, and stepped away for only a few minutes to help Lily carry her poster board. When he returned, he found a group of fathers had pulled the empty chair away from its spot and repurposed it for their own overflow seating. The cardigan folded carelessly and set on the floor beside a stack of extra programs. Nobody had done it out of cruelty exactly. To them it was simply an unused chair in a crowded gym. But to Daniel, watching Sarah's cardigan lying on a dusty gymnasium floor felt like watching something sacred get knocked over and stepped past without a second glance. He said nothing. He simply picked the cardigan up, brushed it off with a gentleness that made one of the fathers go quiet and look away, ashamed without fully understanding why, and set it back where it belonged. Lily saw the whole thing from across the gym and didn't say a word on the drive home, but she held her father's hand a little tighter than usual, walking to the car. And that night she asked, for the first time, whether they could maybe bring a smaller chair, one that wouldn't take up as much room. It was around this same time that Rachel Bennett entered the story, though neither she nor Daniel would have called it anything close to a story yet. Rachel was 33, a nurse at the regional hospital, recently divorced, raising her son Theo, a wiry, quick-laughing 7-year-old in Lily's grade, mostly alone, after her husband decided marriage was easier to promise than to practice. Her own marriage had ended not in tragedy, but in the quieter, grinding way so many do. A husband who had decided, somewhere around Theo's 5th birthday, that fatherhood and marriage asked more of him than he was willing to give, and who left behind a house full of half-finished promises instead of a grave to visit. Rachel understood grief that had no funeral to mark it, no casserole brigade to soften the first weeks, no socially agreed-upon script for how long her sadness was allowed to last. She recognized something of her own unspoken losses in the whispers she overheard about Daniel Cole before she'd ever exchanged a single word with him, and it made her instinctively protective of a man she hadn't even met yet. Rachel had heard the chair rumors within her first month of school pickups, the way new parents absorb a school's folklore almost by osmosis. She had also, unlike most of the others, decided to ask instead of assume. She found her chance at the winter concert in December. The gymnasium was strung with paper snowflakes and slightly too loud recorded piano music, folding chairs arranged in imperfect rows, parents balancing programs and phones, and the particular exhaustion of holiday season. Daniel arrived, as always, 15 minutes early, set his 2 chairs at the end of a row near the exit. Always near the exit, Rachel would later learn, so that if Lily needed him mid-performance, he could get to her fast, and draped the blue cardigan over the second seat. Rachel sat down 1 chair away, close enough to speak, careful not to sit in the empty one. "That's a nice color," she said, nodding at the cardigan, keeping her tone light, giving him an easy door to walk through or not. Daniel glanced at her, surprised, the way a man is surprised when a stranger doesn't flinch away from the thing everyone else pretends not to see. "It was my wife's," he said simply. "I figured," Rachel said. "I'm not going to ask you to explain it. I just wanted to say I think it's kind of beautiful, actually. My grandmother used to set a plate for my grandfather at Thanksgiving for 6 years after he passed. Nobody in my family ever said a word about it. We just understood." Something in Daniel's shoulders loosened, just slightly, the way a held breath finally lets go. "Most people don't understand it," he admitted. "Most people haven't lost anyone yet," Rachel said. "Give them time. They will. And then they'll wish they'd been kinder about the chairs other people bring." It wasn't a grand moment. There was no swelling music, no dramatic confession. It was just 2 tired parents in metal folding chairs, agreeing quietly that grief doesn't owe anyone an explanation. But it was the first conversation in 3 years where Daniel didn't wail like he had to defend himself, and he thought about it more than he expected to on the drive home. Over the following months, Rachel and Daniel found themselves talking more. At pickup, at the grocery store, once at a Saturday soccer game where Theo and Lily ended up on the same team, and cheered each other on with the fierce, uncomplicated loyalty only children manage. Rachel never pushed. She never once suggested he stop bringing the chair. She simply made space beside her own grief for his, and somehow that made both of theirs a little lighter to carry. But not everyone in the Maple Grove community was as generous as Rachel. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they sharpened as the school year wore toward spring, toward the science fair, toward the very public, very visible parent-teacher award ceremony, where every family would be seated together in the auditorium, chair by chair, in full view of the entire school. That was the event where things finally came to a head. Principal Elena Alvarez had been at Maple Grove for 11 years, long enough to know every family's small rituals and quiet sorrows, long enough to have learned that the loudest complaints in a school office were rarely about the thing they claimed to be about. She had heard, second-hand, and then third-hand, about the chair situation, about parents requesting Daniel be asked to stop, about one particularly insistent father who argued it was disruptive to the other children, and frankly, a little unsettling. Mrs. Alvarez was not an unkind woman, but she was, above all, protective of every child under her roof, including Lily Cole, who she'd watched go from a wide-eyed kindergartner, clutching her father's hand, to a third grader who sometimes flinched when she thought no one was looking. So on the Tuesday before the award ceremony, she asked Daniel to stop by her office after drop-off. Daniel sat across from her desk with the particular stiffness of a man bracing for bad news, the kind he'd received too many times in hospital corridors to ever fully relax around an official-looking desk again. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," Mrs. Alvarez began carefully. "I want to say that first, because I know how this can sound. But I have to ask, Daniel, for Lily's sake as much as anything, why the chair? Every single time. I've watched you do it for 3 years, and I've watched some of the other families struggle to understand it, and I think it would help me, help all of us, help Lily even, if I understood it too." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands, calloused from work, the same hands that used to hold Sarah's in the hospital when the machines got too loud to think over. "When Sarah got sick," he finally said, "the doctors gave her 11 months. She spent probably 4 of those months too tired to get out of bed most days. But she never once complained about missing time with Lily. Not once. What she was terrified of, genuinely, bone-deep terrified, was that Lily would grow up and Sarah would become a photograph. A story I told. Someone Lily couldn't quite picture in the room anymore." He paused, and Mrs. Alvarez didn't fill the silence. Some instinct telling her he needed the room to hold it. "So I promised her," Daniel continued, "that no matter what, she would have a seat at everything. Every recital, every science fair, every single ordinary school morning that felt like nothing to anyone else, but meant everything to us. I promised her she would never, ever be a photograph to our daughter. I didn't know how to keep a promise like that. I still don't. Not really. But bringing the chair, it's the only way I've found to make it feel true. It's not that I think she's literally sitting there. I know she isn't. It's that when I look at that empty seat, I remember that I made a promise, and I haven't broken it yet. And somehow that makes it easier to walk into a room where everyone else has a whole family, and I only have half of one." Mrs. Alvarez had to look away for a moment, blinking hard, an unexpected tightness in her throat. In 11 years, she had heard a great many things in that office. She had never heard anything quite like this. "Does Lily understand all of that?" she asked gently. "I've tried to explain it," Daniel admitted. "I don't know if it's landed the way I want it to. Kids that age, they mostly just want to fit in. I know the chair makes that harder for her sometimes. I've thought about stopping. God knows I've thought about it. I just don't know how to let go of a promise to someone who can't ever release me from it. Mrs. Alvarez didn't have an easy answer for him that day, and to her credit, she didn't pretend to. But something shifted in her that morning, a decision quietly forming that she wouldn't fully act on until 3 weeks later, on the last day of school, at the final assembly of the year. That assembly was meant to be simple: certificates, a slideshow of the year's highlights, the usual closing remarks before summer. The gymnasium was packed tighter than usual, every family present, every folding chair filled, except, as always, the one beside Daniel Cole, cardigan draped neatly over its back, Lily seated on his other side in a yellow sundress, her curls held back with a clip Rachel had helped her pick out that morning. What nobody expected was for Lily to stand up, halfway through the ceremony, during the portion set aside for student reflections that Mrs. Alvarez had quietly, deliberately, arranged for her to be part of. Lily walked to the small microphone at the front of the gym, and in a voice that shook only slightly, she said, "My dad brings an empty chair to everything. Some kids at school think it's weird. I used to think it was weird too, if I'm being honest. But it's for my mom. She died when I was 5, and my dad promised her she'd never miss anything in my whole life. So every time there's an empty chair next to us, that's my mom, keeping her promise back." The gymnasium had gone completely silent, 400 people holding their breath at once. "I used to be embarrassed," Lily continued, gripping the edges of the podium the way her father gripped a steering wheel when things got hard. "But today, I brought something." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small folded blue ribbon, the same shade as the cardigan, and pinned it carefully to the empty chair beside her father's, her hands trembling only a little. "This is for anyone else whose family doesn't look like everybody else's. You can bring your empty chair too. My dad taught me that love doesn't leave just because somebody's gone. It just changes shape." Daniel Cole, a man who had not cried in front of another living soul since the week Sarah died, put his face in his hands and wept openly in front of the entire school, and nobody in that gymnasium thought less of him for it. Rachel, sitting 2 rows back with Theo, was crying too, one hand pressed against her chest, as though she could physically hold her own heart in place. Mrs. Alvarez stood at the side of the stage, tears sliding freely down her face, thinking that in 11 years of assemblies, she had never once witnessed anything that came close to this. What happened next spread through Maple Grove faster than any piece of gossip ever had. Parents who had once whispered about the chair situation began, one by one, to approach Daniel after the assembly, not with pity, but with something closer to reverence. One father who had complained loudest about it being unsettling shook Daniel's hand and admitted, quietly, that he'd lost his own father 2 years earlier and had never once found a way to talk about it with his kids. A mother who'd rolled her eyes at the chair for 3 straight years brought a photograph of her late sister to the next school event and set it gently on an empty seat of her own, murmuring an apology to Daniel that he accepted without a word, only a nod, understanding better than anyone what that small, brave gesture had cost her. Even Marcus, the boy who had once called Lily empty chair girl on the playground, found his own mother in tears that evening, and the following week he approached Lily at recess, awkward and red-eared, to apologize and to ask, quietly, if he could bring a chair for his grandfather at the next assembly. Lily told him yes, of course he could, and helped him fold his grandfather's old flannel shirt over the back of it himself. The two of them crouched together on the gymnasium floor, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The school, at Mrs. Alvarez's quiet urging, eventually adopted something they began calling the empty chair tradition, a standing understanding that at every major event, any family who wanted to could set aside a seat for someone they'd lost. No explanation required, no questions asked, no whispers permitted. It became, over the following years, one of the things Maple Grove Elementary was known for in the wider district, a school that had learned, through one father's quiet, stubborn love, that grief and community were never meant to be kept in separate rooms. As for Daniel and Rachel, their story did not rush toward anything, and neither of them wanted it to. There is a particular kind of patience that only people who have already lost something irreplaceable seem to understand. A willingness to let good things arrive slowly instead of court, forcing them into the shape of what came before. Theo, for his part, had taken to Lily with the easy loyalty of a boy who finally had someone his own age to build blanket forts with on rainy weekends. And more than once, Daniel caught himself standing in a doorway, just watching the two kids argue happily over whose turn it was to be the song dragon, thinking that this, too, was a kind of grace he hadn't expected to find. Grief, real grief, does not make room quickly, and both of them respected that about each other. But over that summer, they found themselves at the same park, more often than coincidence could explain. Their children built an elaborate and entirely serious sandcastle kingdom together, and by the time the next school year started, Rachel's name had become one Lily said often, and easily, and without any of the guarded caution she'd once carried around new adults entering her small world. 2 years later, the empty chair tradition had outgrown Maple Grove entirely. A local news station picked up the story after a teacher posted a photo of the ribbon-tied chairs lining the back of the spring concert, and within a month, 3 other elementary schools in the district had adopted versions of their own. Letters arrived at the school office from as far away as another state, a widow in Ohio who started bringing an empty chair to her grandson's Little League games, a young man in Texas who set a seat for his brother at his own wedding reception, a mother of 3 who wrote simply, "I didn't know I was allowed to still miss him out loud until I read about your school." Mrs. Alvarez kept every letter in a folder in her desk drawer, and on hard days, she read through them, the way other people might read scripture. Daniel still brings the chair. He always will. But now, when he sets it down, it isn't only sorrow he's carrying to it. It's gratitude, too. For a daughter braver than he ever gave her credit for. For a community that finally learned to see grief as something to honor rather than hide from. And for the strange, tender truth that a promise made in a hospital room years ago could grow, slowly and unexpectedly, into something that made an entire school a little softer, a little kinder, and a little more willing to leave room for the people they carry with them, even after they're gone. If this story touched you even a little, please like this video, subscribe for more stories like it, and leave a comment telling us who you would set an empty chair for. Somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded today that love really can outlast loss. It just learns, in time, to sit in a different chair.